Hey everyone, welcome to Sales and Cigars. I'm Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development, your host. Today we got a fun episode with George Bronten from Membrain. George is the CEO and the founder of Membrain. Membrain's a partner of Helix. It's one of the tools that we use to power our clients to be successful and double their revenue in 3 to 5 years. So we get to understand a little bit about George's background and a little bit about the thought process into how Membrain is created and keeps getting upgraded and changed and moving with the times. So go grab a cocktail, a cigar, strap in for another episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. So George, welcome to the Sales and Cigars podcast. I appreciate you taking some time to join us from
Thank you very
Sweden,
much.
right?
Yes,
You're
I'm in Stockholm,
in Sweden today. I'm based in Michigan. I think our weather patterns are not completely different. Usually a little chillier in Sweden than here, but I've got
I'm
24
at the
degrees
freezing point.
Fahrenheit.
I'm not that good at Fahrenheit, but it's not that cold where I am. So I'm in Stockholm. You know, Sweden is a very tall country. So if you go far up north, it's very snowy and very cold. But here in the capital, it's not that cold. No snow, actually.
Yeah, it's more like what we have, I think, here in southeastern Michigan. Um, so I want to set the stage for listeners that I'm a little biased when it comes to Membrain. I'm a partner, been a partner for a while. I think it's the tool that every sales organization should use. I'm sure you're happy to hear that, but so I'm a little biased in terms of my relationship. But can you kind of give us a little background as to how Membrain came
Sure.
about and
Yes,
a
I
little bit
guess
of
you
your
could call me an
backstory?
entrepreneur. I've started a few companies, and my previous company before Membrain was I guess we could call it an IT software distributor in the Nordics, and our customer base were IT management companies or remote management companies, and
Mm-hmm.
it was in this company, which is called Upstream, by the way, which rhymes well with my life motto, not wanting to be mainstream. uh, that we tried to really find, very promising pieces of software to provide to the SME space through these partners, these resellers of ours, who were the IT management companies. So we started to offer a new kind of software to these companies, which at the point I did not realize, but they were very complex. They were complex to use, they were complex to sell as a result of that. So we shifted our way of selling, or we had to shift without me realizing, completely from a pretty transactional sale into a very complex sale. So that was what
Mm-hmm.
really started this snowball thing with that got me to Membrain, because I basically made all the mistakes in the book. I was assuming that salespeople were somehow born, and they were working somewhere, and if I could just hire them from these companies, they would succeed in my company. And all kinds of crazy assumptions
Sure.
I made, such as that one. And after a while, hiring and firing a lot in that company, which cost a fortune, I had to sit down and give it a real think, like what's
Yeah.
going on? Why am I not succeeding in building a sales team? Whereas I could sell, I was successful selling this complex solution, but the salespeople that I hired that had a great CV were not. So that's when I realized that, oh my God, it's really, the problem is really me. Like I have not understood how much this piece of software changes things for the client. Like this is a real shift for the customer to implement this type of automation platform that we sold. that is not just an easy sell. It's not about the product. It's about how they organize their company, how they build workflows, how they promote, how they package, how they sell, how they market, how they deliver services. Everything had to change if they bought this platform. So that's
Mm-hmm.
when I sort of realized, okay, and this is another type of selling than providing, an alternative email server, which was what we were doing before that. Like, this is a great email platform and it costs, a tenth of
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft Exchange, was an easy sell. So that was really what brought me to, okay, now that I know how difficult it can be to buy this product, maybe that's why it's also difficult to sell it. And I have not done enough to train my salespeople that I hired. And also, I hired them based on the wrong,
Mm-hmm.
premises, on the wrong assumptions. Because if you're good at selling something transactionally and you're used to, closing a deal with one phone call, and now you have to, get used to a multi-stakeholder, long sales cycle. That's a completely different game. So that was a long answer to
Sure,
your short question.
it is. Well, but it's a good answer because most entrepreneurs, we've learned the things that we've know
Yeah,
through experience, through making mistakes, and gaining that. And we only it's really the best way to learn and hold on to that
yeah,
knowledge, because it's freaking painful to go through that process. Hiring and firing and training and hiring and firing salespeople is
yeah,
painful, it's difficult, it's expensive, as you said. um, and in understanding the complexity of a B2B sale um, is there's still people here that are, in the States, that are selling a complex
yeah,
product, and they're still talking about their product. um, One of the things that we share with clients is that if we're talking about our product or service, we're talking about our offering early in the process, we're we're making a mistake. We're not engaging
mm,
the prospect correctly. We're not going to gather the information we need to help them. And I think that's something else that we share in common,
mm,
is that we're really trying to help people
yes,
in a B2B sale. And
yeah.
we're not always the right fit.
And I think also, if you, that's a really good point. And
You're
when you look at, successful salespeople who have a process, because that's what Membrain is. For those who don't know, it's all about process, right? How do we build a solid milestone based process that is aligned with how the buyer needs to make a decision. That it's often about understanding why they shouldn't pick you, right? It's like, it's almost better to have that conversation,
Mhm.
because you'll then uncover all those you know fears that they might have to make a change. Because in my world, a complex B2B sale is really about
Mhm.
change management. You are trying to introduce an improvement, something that
Mhm.
will help them become better. But we also know that there is already something in place, right? They're doing something. So if we're selling them, like what we did
Mhm.
before in Upstream, the automation tool, they were doing all of those things already. They were, patching servers and installing software and making sure there was antivirus on the computers, just that they had to do it manually, or one by one. And instead, now they could do it automatically and they could do it proactively.
Mhm.
But that messed with how they did things. So the tech people, they got really scared, like, oh my god, my boss is going to invest in automation, meaning I'm going to lose my job. So although we come in, with an improvement, that everything
Fear.
is going to get better, you can still make the customer feel that their job is going to be in jeopardy. So they're going to do everything they can to prevent the deal from happening. So I think that's what's exciting with selling, right?
Yeah, it's exciting. It's fear. So, like, when Henry Ford developed and automated the building of an automobile, that put fear. The guys that were driving the horses and building the carriages and the wagon wheels to put those folks out of business eventually. So anything that's new and comes along and could be could that's going to create some level of transformation is scary to somebody in an organization, and that fear needs to be dealt with in the sales process with those stakeholders to bring them in. And maybe we can't completely alleviate
Yeah.
their fear, but we need to at least address it in that process. So you talked you started to talk a little bit about Membrain, and one of the things that the way I talk about Membrain with prospects, and I just did this morning, was that because he referred to it as a CRM, and I'm like, yeah, okay, CRM. That's how we communicate the idea. But
Mm-hmm.
I said I look at it as like processes, so that we can get our salespeople to think about, we're going to do this activity right now. We're going to block 45 minutes on our calendar to go do prospecting and business development. And Membrain allows us to do that process, to do that work without thinking about anything else. And we can stay focused, and we can manage our pipeline. We can manage our target accounts. Is a process driven.
Right.
And by the way, there's a CRM inside the tool. And frankly, George, I rarely look at the CRM component because I'm so focused on the other aspects of it. When this was being developed, and it's still being improved upon, it's one of the things I love about Membrain is just when I start to figure something out and I got it,
Yeah.
I think I understand it, you guys make it better. Um, and I got to learn a little something new. It's part of the fun of what we do. But can you
Mm-hmm.
talk a little bit about how you got to those processes and why those
Yes.
were
So
help
one of
with
my
effectiveness?
realizations back in upstream was that I needed to provide the salespeople that I hired with the right training, of course, but also with the right process, because I had a process in my head. I knew that, okay, I need to not just convince the owners of this company that they can go from 3% profit margin to a 30% profit margin, but I also need to engage and involve the technical people so they're not afraid that this is going to make them lose their job. And I need to engage the marketing people and the sales people because now they're going to
Mm-hmm.
be able to be more competitive, et cetera, et cetera. So I had that all in my head, and that's why I succeeded in selling it. Whereas a new hired salesperson who hadn't sold anything like this previously had, of course, had to be trained. And the way I sort of wanted this to work was to have a very visual, call it almost like a checklist on steroids. Like, okay, I need to do this and this and this and this and
Mm-hmm.
that in this particular order for it to be effective. And to tell someone how to do that, you can do that. You can train someone, and then you can, do co-visits and try them to see that they're doing it right, which you should, of course, anyhow. But I wanted the tool to be very
Mm-hmm.
visual and not just saying these are things that have to be done, but also convey how they should be done. Uh, and I'm a big believer in storytelling. And
Mm-hmm.
when it came to these tech people, I had this training session which was very short. It was called the Pizza and Thursdays, because what happened for these tech guys was once a
Okay.
month, and this was a while back, so this is probably not how they do it any longer. But back then, they had to work overtime at least once a month to install all the new patches that came from Microsoft on all their clients' servers, and they couldn't interrupt their
Mm-hmm.
customers during daytime, so they had to do this in the evening. And it was pretty boring work. So they had to work overtime. They ordered pizza and they sat there
Right.
patching all their customers' computers and basically hated the work. So if we could then tell them that this is work that you no longer would need to do if we could automate it, So if you could automate this, you could be, at a game or at home with your family having a dinner. Isn't that nicer than have to, do this really boring work? And that way they kind of, oh, okay. So you mean my boss is not just buying this to get rid of us. He's actually buying this to improve our lives and for us to provide a better service for the customer. Yes, that's what's all this about. Now you can go back to doing fun projects instead because you're going to free up your time. And all of a sudden they were like, they dropped their
Right.
guard and said, "Oh, wow, this is probably a good thing. I might be positive now." So I wanted to interject that into the process at the right time. This is where you need to have this discussion with these type of stakeholders. And if you don't do this, well, there's no, you're not allowed to send a quote. You're not allowed to move on to the next stage or step in the process because this is going to come back and bite you in the butt. So basically building these things in, these best practices into
Yep.
this process was my reasoning behind creating a process.
So, but what you created with Membrain, and you can take the process that I use, the process that Membrain uses, the process that any company uses, and implement it, put it into Membrain. It can be optimized. There's lots of things we can do with it, but we can. It has the flexibility to create that visual so that we can see where we are in the process, what stage we're in, which milestones we've checked off, because it's literally when you look at the one view, you're literally looking at a series of checklists that are there together, and I think it's a distinction that we try to make with the clients that we work with, that this isn't you have to do this way. Right. It's like this is what we know works. Sometimes it's linear, sometimes it isn't, but these are all of the points that we need to gather and discuss with the prospect for the reasons that you told the story about the IT people. When we're working with a larger account, your team does a great job of bringing in all of those stakeholders to engage and get buy-in and start to uncover what they're concerned about. Because sometimes it's about losing their job, but often these days it's worried about one more thing I'm being asked to manage. And once we get them to realize that they just have to help with the integration and making sure that this flows really well with any other pieces of software, that their job is quite easy because it's
and
they're not involved
learning,
all that much afterwards. So
in my previous company and yeah, I guess throughout my entire career is that we need to know why we win and why we don't win. And those learnings we need to then bring back into how we sell. So if we figure out that we are very strong in a niche, we can do a win-loss on all the deals we've pulled through the pipeline, then it should make sense that we focus on that niche, and we target our prospecting efforts there. But I see that's another thing that too few companies do well, is really dive into their win-loss analysis to see, okay, why are we winning? Why are we losing? And then you actually alter, maybe not your strategy, but definitely your tactics. So, but you could also alter the strategy. You might even change your ICP or who you're going after if you learn that. But you need to know what's working and what's not working, and then you need to see, okay, who's really performing, and what is that person doing differently than someone else, and can we embed that into our way of selling, which is just another way to say, can we embed it into the process? Because process, I've also learned, I think a lot of people are attracted to sales because you have a very high level of autonomy in this line of work. And as soon as we talk about process, a lot of salespeople do like the tech people did. They cross their arms and like, I hate the word sales process. I don't want the sales process. I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to sell in a copy paste way
Hmm.
as someone else, which you already stated. That's not the point, right? The point is that we want to make sure that we get a very effective selling environment. We want to win and help as many customers as we can. And we don't want to make stupid mistakes like not engaging the right stakeholders. If we know that when we do that, we have, a 300% higher win rate, which was the case in upstream. So you really have to,
Mm.
I think, always be learning what works, what does not work, what you can't always copy what one person does in the exact same way, but we can definitely aim to copy the outcomes of that person and then
Right.
alter, the details on how we go about doing it. But I think it's a process or playbook or a way of selling needs to be a living thing, right? Always improve.
Yeah, a living thing, I think, is a great way to describe it. I look at it as it's when I get those more senior salespeople who cross their arms and say, I've been doing this
Mm-hmm.
a long time and I know what I'm doing. I don't need this process. Um, it's sort of like, to me, a sheet music that we put in front of a great musician, and I don't care, a great jazz trumpeter, right? We can hear three notes and we know the difference between Miles Davis and Louis Armstrong and Dizzy Gillespie, right? They
Mm-hmm.
played the same instrument, but they did it in their own way. So if we're giving you a process with some milestones and some stages, not unlike a sheet of music, go play it in your way, nuanced, the way that you do it in your voice. But these are the things that we've learned that are important to gathering
Yeah.
along the way. Don't miss the notes. And the if they play all the notes, the music's the same, but it just sounds completely different from
Yeah.
salesperson to salesperson, or trumpeter or saxophone player. And it gives them the freedom to operate, but sometimes that's a hurdle, especially for that old grizzled salesperson who doesn't want to have to be anything that's a anything that comes across their space where
Yeah.
it could be viewed as micromanagement. That's what they do. And I think this actually gives Membrain gives us freedom to operate in a way of our own choosing, but with
Mm-hmm.
just reminders like, hey, I don't want to forget this. And I know when I miss a step or I miss a key
Yeah.
question to ask,
Mm-hmm.
win rates drop. I don't care who you are. When we forget something, and that's what this does. It doesn't matter if it's a prospecting piece or managing a pipeline with sales projects, um, and and you're just targeting those accounts and being able to grow the accounts with knowing what we're supposed to do. I think the other part of Membrane that I really spend time with coaching uh, salespeople and sales
Yeah.
managers is the
Mm-hmm.
performance analysis component. Can you talk a little bit how that was developed and why those four metrics
Yeah.
are
No,
so
absolutely. And
important to long term
uh,
success?
some of the inspiration for that module or for that view was partly my frustration with traditional CRMs, where when you go into the dashboards, you get these really fancy, pie charts and speedometers and stuff. But really, if you want to track someone's performance, you need to see a trend line. You want to see, is this a curve that is pointing in the right direction, on the wrong direction? Because that's how you know what to coach. And then the structure of the performance view uh, is inspired by the book Cracking the Sales Management Code by Jason Jordan and Michelle Vazana, which I think they did such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful work when they looked at all these different KPIs used in selling to define, is this a KPI we can manage as a frontline sales manager? Can I manage this KPI? And of course, they realized that some of the metrics were, results. Some of the metrics they looked at were more, objectives. and some were activities. And their conclusion, of course, was we
Mm-hmm.
can't really, you know, we can't really coach results. Results is an outcome. We can't really coach objectives because they're also an outcome. But we can
Right.
coach to activities. What we actually do should lead to, that we increase the objectives, which could be win rate, deal size, sales cycle, number of projects created or opportunities created, which are really the only, what's the English word? The only knobs we can turn to improve the volume or the effectiveness.
Sure.
Yeah, we can tune it in. We
We can
can
tune
see,
it. We
okay,
can
your
tune it
win
in a
rate
little bit.
is dropping. Why is it dropping? And we can have a coaching conversation about that. We can see that win rates are actually improving, but the deal sizes are declining. So we need to see all these at a glance, which was really my ambition, to give trend lines and a really nice categorization so that as a sales manager or coach, you can quickly identify and benchmark, by the way. So you can look at one person and compare to another person, high performer, low performer, mid performer, or teams,
Mm-hmm.
and quickly then see, okay, this person is outperforming that person on this metric. And if we don't know already, we could also interview them to find out, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's really a great coaching and also self-coaching, right? Because you could, as the performer yourself, as the salesperson, you can go in and look at these numbers because you want to make sure that you get better.
It's not hidden from anyone with access to the instance. It's there. And what's great from a sales manager's perspective is that they don't need to do anything else other than ensure that the activity is recorded once by the rep. And if they're doing what we've asked them to do, there's really nothing else for that salesperson to do. And the sales manager gets information. And you can, when you're looking at those trend lines, you can actually go back and show, like, look, you had a great first quarter. And why did we have a great first quarter? Your win rates we stayed pretty constant, but in your average deal size was pretty much the same. But you added so many new projects, right? And now that you've stopped adding those new projects into your pipeline, your success has dropped. So we can really dial in what the individual may or may not be doing to help. We pick one of those on a sometimes a monthly, sometimes a quarterly basis to work with with a salesperson to focus on one thing that's going to move the needle. And they sometimes understand why we've chosen one piece, and sometimes they don't, but they just spend the time to focus. But they see the results. They see the results in their commission checks, but they see the results graphically within the platform. It's just a wonderful tool. And if a salesperson hasn't read Jordan's book, then they're shortchanging themselves, because that he does a really deep dive and explains why those 4 metrics are important. And you've done a great job of putting those out in front of everyone to make it simple. There's one other thing I wanted to touch on. One of the blog posts that you put together that talks a little bit about sales effectiveness and what that really means. Your interpretation there, I think, is spot on. Can you share with the audience, what's important to take away from that idea of somebody's improving their effectiveness?
Let's see if I can summarize that. But I guess the if I remember it correctly, what I wrote was we want to have a high average output per salesperson, and in order to do that, first we need to understand what output is, because it's not always just about top line revenue, but for some companies it is. But for others, it might be high margin or selling a new product line or whatever. But what I always talk about when it comes to this topic is to realize that there's a difference between effectiveness and efficiency. Because I see a lot of people, they're just trying to improve efficiency, and they go out and buy, email spamming tools. I call them. I think the vendors call them sales engagement tools.
Mhm.
But basically, if you believe that just sending out tens of thousands of
Sure.
emails is going to make you more effective, it's probably not going to. So effectiveness is really about doing the right things, right? And that's a major thing I always try to convey. Like, and that's where the process, it all boils down to that. Having, knowing exactly what your potential buyer needs to go through in their minds and with their teams in order to come to a decision that hopefully includes you, and then you build your process based on that. So sorry, that wasn't maybe super clear based on your question, but
No, I think the distinction that I was looking for, it's something that Tim Ferriss has talked about at length in the past,
mm-hmm.
is that there's a difference between effectiveness and efficient, and we need to, if we focus on doing the right things the right way, that we will have greater success. But I think the other piece that comes out of that is, if we're doing the right things the right way, in the right order,
Correct.
we don't need to do as many of them, right? We can actually dial back
Yeah.
all of that,
and
10,000
I
emails a
want to add
week
something that
that
with the right
is
intentions,
annoying.
because I think that's also missing sometimes in selling
Mm,
today. It's, you have to have the right intentions, like you talked about. You want to help someone become better. You don't just want to sell. And sometimes I think
right.
in our world that gets lost, because people, they're they get commissions checks based on what they sell, and not always on the outcome they help someone produce. So there's a balancing act there that needs to be looked at as well. Yes, you need to do the right things at the right time with the right people, but also with the right intentions.
But that gets the doing the right things is always the long term play. And
Mm.
when a salesperson or a
Yeah,
company, because it's not always just the salesperson,
yeah,
sometimes the company is pushing a transactional mindset, that and that's what I know, that's what I try to do, and I know Membrain tries to do this, is
mm-hmm.
to elevate the profession of sales, and to take away those stereotypes that
Mm-hmm.
are proliferated in movies and television shows and commercials. Um, and we're not going to do away with
Mm-hmm.
them forever, because they're cultural, they're there. But we can influence how people think about salespeople by the way we operate. And if we have the right intention, and that's to help people, and we're not thinking transactionally, all of that will come back to you as an individual and to the company,
Yeah,
just by doing the right things on a
agreed.
consistent basis,
Yeah.
and that makes us effective. So let me. I like to ask a question of all of my guests. Sometimes it makes people uncomfortable, but I still ask,
Yeah, yeah.
because that's part of a salesperson's job, is to ask uncomfortable questions from time to time. But does George have a relationship, past or
Yeah, I
present, with
guess I have one
cigars?
story to share. I'm not a cigar smoker, but I remember one time I was invited to Dallas in Texas, and we had a great steak dinner. And then after the steak dinner, we went
Hmm.
downstairs, and I was wondering why do we need to move from this nice restaurant downstairs into the basement? And that was because we were going to be served Cuban cigars, which were apparently not allowed in the restaurant. So we went down. So I
Yeah, we
understand,
have a
and
we have a weak
and everything was
relationship with
very
Cuba for
fancy,
the
and I
last
was maybe in my
70 years.
early 20s, and they lighted it with cedar tree, and it was all really fancy, and uh, and I remember
Wow.
we were talking. We had some wine, and I was maybe not completely sober, but after a while, I looked down at the table, at this beautiful tablecloth, and I had just made such a mess. with my cigar. And I realized, oh my God, this was embarrassing. And I tried to remove the ashes, but it just, made an even greater mess on this exclusive. So that was
Smeared it
an
right in.
interesting experience with cigars. But apart from that, I'm not a big cigar smoker.
So your first experience with cigars in your 20s
Yes.
um, was a fine Cuban cigar.
Yeah,
That's
I'm not
pretty
sure everyone
impressive,
else
George.
saw
Uh,
my Cuban cigar smoking as very impressive. That's a good memory. It's a fun memory.
well, a big Texas steakhouse with probably very few
If I remember
vegetables
correctly, yeah.
involved in that meal. If yeah, and a few cocktails. That's good. That's a good story. I appreciate you sharing. Um, so we'll have the way to get in touch with Membrain. That'll all be in our show notes. We'll have the website. Is there before we jump? Do you want to talk about share the book and where people can find your book, because that's definitely
Yes,
worth
it's called
worth
Stop Killing
a
Deals,
read for our
and you
listeners
can
as
get it
well.
on Kindle or from Amazon, and it's easy to find based on the title. And otherwise, I write the blog, so the art and science of complex sales. I publish at least one or two articles a week. So that would be a recommendation if you're into these kind of things to subscribe to my blog, or find me on LinkedIn and connect. Love to connect with you.
Yeah, the blogs are one of there's probably 5 or 6 blogs I subscribe to in the sales space that I read, yours being one of them. And I'm not just pandering here, because they do something that I like. Um, yours and Dave Brock's kind of make me think differently and to kind of question things um, around the idea of sales, like how should we approaching it, and how we look at things from an objective point of view. I find it always a good, solid read,
Happy to hear that.
and usually we walk away learning something. So we'll have all that in the show notes. If you're and Paul Paul Fuller
Correct.
is started a podcast for
No,
Membrain.
I
You've
have
been
to
able to
stand
get
in line
yourself
now.
on as a guest there yet?
Yeah. Yeah, he's lined up a bunch of cool guests, and you've already been on it, or are you coming up?
He's recorded. He's recorded mine. I listened to the one that he did with Gretchen.
Nice.
He dropped that yesterday. I think mine drops next week. Um, so yeah, he's got the goofy little hat that he
Part of the
wears, but
show,
that's
yeah.
that's his
Yeah.
shtick. So um, yeah, it's part of the deal. So George, I appreciate you taking some time
My pleasure.
and being on the podcast. Appreciate your
Thank
insights.
you.